Piston fanatic. I'm your host, Dave Dalton, and I'm excited to share my passion and perspective of our Detroit Pistons as we go on this fantastic voyage together. I've been a diehard Piston fan since the days of Dave Bing and Bob Lanier. I've also been a varsity basketball coach of a very successful program in northern Michigan. Currently, my daughter and I are coaching one of the best AAU teams in the country. Well, we got to see it finally. We got to see some minutes with Duren and Wiseman playing together, and I was pushing for that, hoping for that since the day that we traded for Wiseman. And Duren was injured at the time, and so anyway, I think it worked out fine that Wiseman got to come in and got automatically more minutes because Duren wasn't available. And now Bagley got hurt, so now there's, we got just the two guys, but I've been hoping for those two guys to get to play together. We need to have that happen. We have, there's 14 games left, I think, and we want to experiment. We want to see what can happen. Where do we play them best? We got to see some really cool action where Duren caught the ball away from the basket. He had 3 assists to Wiseman. I think they were all for dunks that were just great passes. Anyway, I don't understand why, Casey finally said that he did it, but he did it out of desperation that he played the two together, not because out of necessity, because Amarui got in foul trouble. Otherwise, it never would have happened. But we just need to see more of it, and it might not work out great. And I'm sure that even if it could work out in the future, what's going to happen? So Wiseman could develop into a three-point shooter. We've seen the journey that Stu's been on, and he's tried to develop as a three-point shooter, and he started out a little bit slow, then he got up really efficient for a while, and then he had a terrible slump, and then at the very last couple games before he was injured, he got on fire. So anyway, Wiseman's going to probably need the same, type of thing, and he's going to need to work on his three a lot during the summer, so we will not even know, I don't think, until the middle of next year. So, but again, my common refrain, what do we have to lose, man? We got the rest of this year, play those two together, play them apart, get them, more minutes, play them. I said in prior podcasts I was wanting at least 10 minutes together because they were only combining for 48 minutes. And they're both so good, and they're both been, they've been rebounding, they're both shooting efficiently, and we want to see what they can do. So these guys are not just, Wiseman's 7 foot, Duren, I don't know if he's 6'11", what he is, but they are not just your average big guys that are 7-footers. They are smooth, they are coordinated, they are skilled, and we're just starting to see, the tip of the iceberg, especially with Duren. And I think that it's exciting going forward to have those. I mean, if the worst thing that happened is those guys were going to split their minutes at the 5 and, play 48 minutes combined, that would still be a great, they're so together, they're averaging like 30 points and 25 rebounds or more combined. It's just incredible. But just to see them together, nobody in the NBA can put out hardly, except for Cleveland, two guys that are so long and athletic. So a lot of teams have bigger guys and multiple big guys, but they don't have this size. So that's why that high-low action where Duren caught the ball at the free throw line or above the free throw line a little bit, and he was able to dump it down. They can't guard both of them. The lineups that most teams put on there, and they can move their feet. I think that I'm convinced that they have a chance to develop defensively. That is yet remains to be seen, but I really believe that can happen because, like I said, these two guys are gifted. So, when we're playing against Denver, and they do this, and they, combined for 29 points, 22 rebounds against Denver. So that Denver, some of these stats are, empty stats, and they're against bad teams. So when we're playing against the Pacers and they're not starting their best players or whoever we play, and they don't have a lot of their lineup in there, they might be empty. But this is against the team. They've struggled lately. They had lost 4 in a row, Denver. But the Nuggets are the number 1 team in the West. And so they're doing it. And Jokic isn't the greatest defender in the world. But still, it was impressive. I loved Duren got the ball at the free throw line once, and he caught the ball, and he took one dribble, and then he made this great spin move on Jokic and got off a good shot, but he missed it. But he got it back, and then he tried to throw this wraparound pass where he extended his arm way around the defender and flipped it over to Wiseman. It was a little bit errant, but it just showed his vision in his feel for the game and what he might be and potentially going forward. Also, though, I would like to shout out to Rodney Magruder. I know it's not the favorite Piston of anybody's, I don't think, but Rodney scored 20 points and had eight rebounds. And, he's not that big, but he was 6 for 10 on threes. And, all accounts are that I've heard is Rodney's the coolest guy. He's the guy that, if there's one guy that everybody on the team loves, it's Rodney Magruder. And they also, I know Jaden Ivey says that he has to work to beat Rodney to get to practice. So Rodney hasn't played hardly all year, and now he's come in there in the last quite a few games. He's just been really, really good for us. But he has been great for our team to see and to be, a role model for our guys to see how to be a professional. And I love everything about it. But again, I want us to experiment. I want us to let Wiseman catch the ball out at the 3-point line. And if they segue off him, so that's one of the things Beef Stew had going for him. He was getting wide open threes because people weren't guarding him. Even at the end, they weren't guarding him. So there's a difference between making contested threes and open threes. My thing is, if you got a really big guy on Wiseman or Duren, if they can't come out at all to challenge those two guys, they're so talented. They're going to blow by. They're going to go right by you, and they got moves. They got spin moves, and they got all kinds of different tricks that we haven't even seen that they're going to be able to score and do things. So we got to experiment. We got to figure out things on offense. Somebody's got to be creative on the Piston staff. They got to come up with ways when those two guys are in so that our spacing's good. We got to have decent spacing, and if Rodney's in the game, at least we got a good 3-point shooter. We can have some spacing. So let's hope that they do it the last 14 games, and it's, like I said, it's going to be interesting what they do. In the meantime, we're still, we still want to have a bad record. We still want to get the best draft pick possible. And unfortunately, the Spurs, they were ahead. I turned on the game. It was 114 to 108, or no, 106. They were up by 8 with not 4 minutes left, and they completely fell apart, the Spurs. And they lost that game in overtime, but they just made a lot of mistakes. So just a little bit about the draft. I mean, what we're looking for, and the player that we're looking for is Mikal Bridges, that plays for the Nets. He was traded from the Suns. Obviously, I don't think that they would ever trade him. I got to believe that the Nets going forward, that he would be the cornerstone of their team. I think he's like 26 years old. He's got 3 years left on his contract, only $22 million a year. He's averaging 26 points and 56% from the floor and 43% on threes, and he is the best perimeter defensive player in the NBA. And so, if we can get somebody close to that is what we're looking for. Another guy, Franz Wagner, which obviously Orlando is never going to trade him, but he's that 6'9", 6'10" guy. But we are hoping that Brandon Miller has a chance to be that kind of player, and so we'll just see what happens with the draft, and that's a ways off. But now I want to talk about the worst team in Piston history. So, as I say, I'm a diehard Piston fan. I was a big Piston fan for, since over 40 years, 50 years, and I love the Pistons. And so sometimes they weren't on TV very much a lot of the years that I was, or I didn't have cable, and I still followed them closely, including the 1979-1980 team, which was the worst team in Piston history. Well, right now the Pistons have 16 wins, and that team finished the year with only 16 wins. But it's March Madness. Dickie V, he's the king of March Madness in my opinion. But he was the coach of the Piston team. He assembled that team. Actually, he got fired early that season. He was the coach the year before, and they weren't very good, but he was like the coach and general manager. So real interesting to look back at that team. They had 3 guys from University of Detroit, where Dickie V was their coach. Terry Durod, you say do, every time he made a basket, Durod. And Terry Tyler, who was like 6'6" or 6'7", but he could jump out of the gym, man. He could block shots, and he rebounded. He could really get off the floor. And John Long, that I forget exactly what they said on the announcements when he showed his rock set, his long jumper, he didn't jump very high when he did it, but George Blaha had said his rock step or something, I can't remember, but he averaged 19.2 points a game, and he was a good Piston for years after that. He was a really good, solid player, and he had some really big scoring games. But Bob Lanier, who passed away recently, and the Pistons are honoring him with they're wearing that patch that has his number 16 on it. But he played the first 37 games on that team, and he was getting towards the end of his career. But the Pistons, obviously they were going to need to tear down and rebuild, so they traded him to the Milwaukee Bucks, where he had some really good years, even though he was at the end of his career and he wasn't as good as he had been when he was with the Pistons. But he averaged 21.7 points for the Pistons that year. Another player on that team was Special K himself, Gregory Kelser, as George Blaha says on the games. Greg Kelser is an announcer for the Pistons, and he was one of the great players, the second best player on that Michigan State team that won the national championship with Magic, and Magic would throw those lobs, and Special K would dunk them. And sometime I'm going to speak about this, but I have been very, everybody makes mistakes when they project players in the draft and pick players, but my biggest miss in projecting players was, I thought after watching Larry Bird, they weren't on TV very much. He played for Indiana State, and Larry Bird they were undefeated, playing Michigan State in the final game and championship game. And I watched him play, Larry Bird, against the Michigan State team with Magic and Kelser and Jay Vincent, and they had a great team, and they were more athletic, and he didn't really have any teammates that were that good, but he didn't look that great. And Michigan State was far more athletic. He scored some points, but he was very inefficient. And so my take was that he was a good player, that he was going to average like 18 points and 10 rebounds a game in the NBA and be an all-star maybe here and there. But I never dreamt that he was going to be one of the greatest players that ever lived. And I was wrong, and I thought Greg Kelser, and again, in Greg's defense, he suffered through lots of injuries. So injuries impact players all the time. And back then, we're going to talk about this in a minute, they didn't have the knowledge about how to care for injuries and things that they do today. But Greg Kelser averaged 14.2 points a game on that team. But they also had Bob McAdoo, who was a Hall of Famer that was one of the first big. I mean, he was like 7 foot, at least 6'11", and he could shoot the three. And he had this jumper, man. He extended his arms high, but he was way before his time. They had Phil Hubbard, who was a star in some really great Michigan teams, and a guy that was really near and dear to my heart was James McElroy. James McElroy. Most of you probably don't know him, but he played in the NBA. He played for the Jazz. He played for the Pistons. But he played also, I graduated from Central Michigan University, and they had the greatest team in school history when I was there in the early 70s. And he was tremendous. He was a junior college player, and he scored over 20 a game in the MAC, and he was unbelievable. And they had Danny Roundfield on that team that could jump out of the gym just like Terry Tyler, if not higher. And so that was a lot of fun for me. So one thing we did get out of that team that won only 16 games is we got Isaiah Thomas, and we also in that with the third pick, I think, and Kelly Tripucka we got with the 7th pick. So those were the two. That was the start of the rebuild that led to the Bad Boys and led to a bunch of world championships. So that's why, I want us to, just tank this year. Hopefully we get, a great player in the draft. We have a little bit of luck in the lottery odds. But I do want to speak a little bit about Isaiah Thomas. I mentioned before on this podcast that he was my favorite all-time Piston. And the sad thing for me, I talked to my brother, and my brother we were talking about load management, and it kind of bothers me that players sit out so much, and that, the Lakers are struggling to make the playoffs, and they're playing the Rockets, and they lose to the Rockets and Anthony Davis didn't play, not because he's not injured, because it was the second game of a back-to-back, and I know they probably thought they were going to win. But anyway, Isaiah played only 12 years, so somebody just passed him on the all-time assist list, and I slips my memory, but it just happened, and this guy played already way more years than Isaiah. Isaiah played only 12 years. He retired when he was like 32 years old because he tore his Achilles. The Pistons missed the playoffs, and he loved the Pistons. He didn't want to play for anybody else. But with modern medicine today, they would have been able to treat that. He would have maybe done load management. Maybe he wouldn't have popped his Achilles. But anyway, it's sad that he would have had a much longer career, and he would have been at the top of or near the top, maybe been under Stockton. But I'm sure if he would have probably played at least 5 or 6 more years. Another time in Piston history that better load management and medical treatment was obviously Grant Hill. Grant was, maybe the most gifted all-around player. He didn't have a great outside shot, but he was so athletic, and he could rebound and block shots, and he was a great defender. He could drive to the basket. He was amazing. And he played for the Pistons. He hurt his foot, and they made the playoffs, and they weren't a great team, but they made the playoffs, and then he played when he shouldn't have played. And he missed like 2 years or 3 years, and he struggled, and he finally had some decent years, but he just never was the same. He was never the elite. He was the next Michael Jordan. I mean, obviously, he probably wouldn't have been that good, but he was out of this world. But anyway, shout out to Michigan State. They beat USC 72-62 in the NCAA tournament. Hopefully, Izzo can work his magic again, like he's done so many times in March. But I want to thank you for listening. Appreciate each and every one of you. Please share my podcast. If you know anybody that likes the Pistons or loves the Pistons, I guess you'd have to be at this point in the season to want to listen. But subscribe on YouTube, leave a thumbs up, click on thumbs up, and leave a 5-star review on Spotify. And do something nice for somebody today. Make somebody's day better. There's lots of easy little ways you can do it. But thank you, and go Pistons.